Hello and welcome to Phrasally Verbocious, a regular podcast wherein two Gearys talk about all things ELT. I'm Chris.
And I'm Alan.
So let's dive in.
So this week we got quite healthy responses from people in the online world. And we thought we'd dedicate a podcast to discussing the points raised in them.
First of all, a question from Mark Carver. Two phrases struck me from your Professionalism on Teachers podcast. Their only qualification is their passport, and you teach more on your first day than you did on your entire CELTA. What do you guys think of MA TESOL? Often no teaching, but obviously a commitment to the profession. Alan?
This is a strange minute for me.
Because you're doing one.
If I'm correct, we're both on our second masters, aren't we? You've just completed yours, and I'm halfway into one, yeah. Well, my current one is MSc in TESOL, and there's absolutely no teaching, as far as the eye can see, being done on it. It's a line of text on your CV. Sorry, that's it.
Is that all it is for you?
To be perfectly honest with you, I have got more CPD this year out of doing Trinity Transformative Teacher webinars than I have this master's so far, and I'm halfway into it. It's kind of weird because even though you have all the readings on it, you basically read an entire library. If I went back into a classroom tomorrow, which I genuinely miss not being in a classroom, like it is very, very strange going from teaching for 7 years surrounded by, what would it be, like 50 people a day or something, to sitting on your own alone for a year. I've seriously come across nothing that I could take into the classroom tomorrow. However, obviously we keep up webinars. We do what I would call normal CPD, and I have so much more that I could take in instead. I think it needs to be in your CV, like Mark said, it needs to be in your CV because it shows a serious commitment to the profession. I hope it gets better.
I think you're right when you comment about commitment to the profession. I think that's definitely true. I had a slightly different experience. Mine was a Master's of Education in Applied Linguistics. It was certainly theoretical. But of course, my learning journey, to use that expression, began in terms of education, began with the PGCE. So what I found really interesting was at this stage, well, 8, 9, 10 years later, was revisiting texts, thinkers, ideas that I first encountered in my PGCE and had no reference point for, no context to think about them in. And then having had 7, 8 years in the classroom, to then reread these things and be able to pin them to experiences in the classroom and professional experience. So actually, for the large part, I found my master's experience, and I did mine while teaching, to be worthwhile in cementing and concreting my theoretical knowledge. But also there were things that I did differently in the classroom, and I've just found something from my final submission. I had a dissertation and a reflection to do. So early in my study, I remember planning classes that would make use of the British National Corpus with my advanced students. I explained how it worked so they could check natural language as well as their grammar references, because I'd never used a corpus before. And then I would find myself using it to answer their questions about natural language, thinking, well, I would say that, but would anyone else say that? Which is a question you often find yourself with natural language in the classroom. Students will say, oh, I heard this, is that correct? And you think, well, I wouldn't say that. And then my go-to now is to go and check the corpus, which I would never have done before. So it's one specific example of what's changed in my classroom, but it's one I can pinpoint quite easily. And the other thing I would say was how... So my PGCE did stress the importance of talk and student talk. And I know about that from obviously CELTA and just being a language learner, but I think the importance of that throughout my course as well made me reflect on how much room I was giving for students to interaction. And also when I observe teaching, that's pretty much my number one go-to is, are the students talking to each other in this lesson? And and then practicing the language. So I would say that actually, definitely overall, my masters had an impact on my thinking and also on my practice. But that was a 2-year masters while I worked, and I was able to actually take stuff from my theoretical reading into my classroom in the same day.
I like the idea of language learning journey, or just learning journey in general. And in retrospect, I think this master's would have worked better as a part-time while teaching. Because I think, especially now, I haven't gone. You know the old saying, a doctor makes the worst patient. So
and teachers make
the worst students. Yeah. So you do sort of see a lot of things, but I think it's that sudden, like, you're always around people you're around literally nobody.
But I think that's more of a this podcast is becoming sort of Alan cancelling. I think that's more of a personal response to a situation than it is necessarily a broader thing. Like, you're just...
Well, I think it depends. I mean, I remember in my first masters there was a much stronger community,
but it's a different subject
about it on the course. True, but I still think, like you were talking about the sort of learning journey. I mean, after I graduated my undergrad, I was manager of a small department for 2 years, and it wasn't until my mid-20s when I went back to university to do my masters. That's probably the first time I really started my awareness of my own learning. And you did. I mean, it's teaching. It's a sociable subject. It's a people person subject. You know. I would like to come back to this podcast in about a year
and see how you've changed or not.
Yeah. You know that thing. You're always smarter than you were 6 months ago.
Absolutely.
I'd be very interested to see an update on that.
Absolutely. We'll see. Okay.
We also got a couple of questions in from Tim, a few comments and a few questions. So Tim asks, now Tim isn't a teacher, which I found this was quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you for listening, Tim.
Does a teacher need to feel or have a vocation to teach or be professional in teaching? For example, as a police officer, one carries out their role with professionalism and empathy, but doesn't necessarily feel or have the emotion when, for example, dealing with a death. It's not my area, thank goodness, facing a bunch of kids of all ages every day. No, thank you.
I like that comment, bunch of kids of all ages. Yes, I definitely teach kids in their 50s.
Oh, you've no idea how much I miss being in a classroom with 10 kids. 10 kids.
Gosh, what a question. Shall I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes and no.
Yeah, there's so many it depends answers to this, doesn't it? Mm-hmm.
Yes and no. I mean, I've had this conversation repeatedly throughout, actually, my teaching career, my teaching day. Oh, I have a career. Yes, throughout my teaching career. And I don't know what my answer is. There are times when I feel yes. Because I think in public, even if you're working privately, public service, public sector type jobs, teaching, nursing, medicine, police, civil, fire, etc. I think if you don't have a sense that you're doing this for a bigger thing than simply your salary or your own career development, then I think you might be in the wrong place.
I think it would be very dangerous for someone who is a teacher to say they're doing it for a salary.
Right. Well, I'm certainly not.
Look where we work. It's definitely not a salary where we work, but.
But I would also say at the same time that I entirely agree with a friend of mine who I originally trained with in 2010, who would maintain that, quote unquote, and I am quoting, it's just a job. And so I say yes and no. I would totally agree with what she says, that it's just a job. And over the years, I've gotten a lot better at closing my mind when I walk away. It's quite nice, actually. In my new job, I often lock up. And so it's something quite nice about putting the shutters down, turning the keys on the shutter and thinking, well, work's finished for the day. But I think when you're there, you have to realise that I think when you're there, it's more than just a job. But when I've walked away from it, it is just a job, although I'm recording a podcast on Tuesday morning.
I don't think I agree with the just a job thing.
Go ahead.
I heard a really good quote a while ago. I was having this conversation with someone about are some people just good teachers? Does it come naturally, or can you work on it? I think obviously, I think a lot of people do. You do need the personality. I think. I do think a certain type of person. It's like a carer or something else. There is certain professions where certain personalities are much better at the job than others. However, a person said to me one time, it doesn't come to me naturally, but to make up for it, I work very, very hard to get there instead, which I thought was a fantastic way of saying it. I think it is a mix between, obviously you can work on it, but I think it does come naturally to others. It's not black and white. It's definitely not black and white.
Yeah, but I also I think that's slightly different answer as well. Is that I think the context is different because we work now in TAFL and it's generally private. When I was working in a high school, and again the context is really important. UK high school, very high pressure environment actually. Teachers in the UK work very long hours. In case anyone's any doubt, they work very long hours. And I think that's where this whole "it's just a job" thing came out. I think that was a very important way for my friend, my colleague, to deal with and say, okay, well, when I'm working, and this is a woman who works extremely hard, is extremely caring. Don't get me wrong, yeah, but that ultimately she has to go home at the weekend.
Oh yeah, you still definitely have to switch off. You go mad, yeah.
And I think that's something that's. It's not. We're not in the same situation as doctors, where there's a wonderful line from Scrubs, the US medical sitcom that I like. Old doctor giving advice to a younger doctor, and he says, "Look, when I'm not in this hospital, I do not think about medicine. Now, if someone has a heart attack in the street and I am physically the closest doctor to them, I will get involved, but otherwise I will walk away. Because otherwise it will just eat you alive." Now, we're not in that situation. There will never be a situation where I'm walking down Paseo de Prado and there's an urgent need for an English language teacher. So in that sense, I think it's very important that we contextualize it. And I think there was something it's been this taboos in ELT has been doing the rounds on Twitter and on the blogosphere and stuff over the last couple of weeks. And there's somebody in there we're not saving the world. Yeah. Now, I think it is a caring profession. We are dealing with people. We're worrying about people as individuals, and I know we're going to talk about emotional intelligence and the affective side of teaching later on in this season. And that's all very true when I'm in the classroom. But my students are not. But when I've left, I'm done.
Yeah, it is very easy for it to possibly consume you. You just have to be very careful. I think
so. Maybe it is a vocation, and maybe it is just a job, but maybe it's both of those things at once.
I was always told by a lawyer friend who worked in one of our refugee organisations, never use the word "just," because the second you use the word "just," you've just demeaned something to someone else.
You've just demeaned it.
Yep. So Tim goes on to say, thinking back to my school days, what made a good teacher in a lesson? Feeling inspired by them or from the lesson? Ooh.
Oh, the teacher. For sure. I can remember teachers.
The teacher equals the lesson.
What's the first thing they ask you when you start any teaching course? Think about your teachers from school.
Yeah.
No one asks you to think about a lesson from school.
Well, yeah. Well,
maybe they should.
It was the teacher that imparted the lesson.
Right, exactly. And it's the teachers that we remember.
And it's the teachers, either personality or what they did or how they did it, that made you remember.
Yeah.
For better or worse sometimes.
Absolutely, but it's their characters that we remember, and I think even the bad teachers that I remember, well, I certainly learned a lot from them.
Yeah, I try to do basically the opposite of what I ever seen in a bad classroom. Yeah.
So Tim also has this is quite a nice question. Thank you, Tim, for planning our podcast for us. I try to do a professional job or role with sensitivity and flexibility and how to work with clients, but don't have any emotion for their circumstances, simply understanding. What is the objective of a teacher? Referring back to educating in a broad sense, to equip for life, or to pass exams on which schools, etc., and employment are judged?
This is the old argument of washback, isn't it? And it's the old argument for teaching in general. Really, do we equip people for life, or do we pass them on exams? We're in the private world. I mean, last year I had four B2 classes, and 38 of those people needed the B2 first. So I mean, those classes were designed. I mean, they all got it. Those classes were designed to get the first. They needed it for either employment, travel, university life. Objective of a teacher. It's quite a good question.
Sorry, Tim, I don't really agree that I think it's a good question. Because I think it's like so much in our wide world at the moment. It's A or B. And actually, I think AB is a perfectly valid answer. I don't think my lessons are necessarily only equipping them for life or to pass exams. Even when I'm teaching exam-based lessons, I'm doing more than that. I think my students are doing more than that. And when we do, I'll signpost it. For example, especially with the advanced levels, C1, C2, students are starting to be quite creative with language. And sometimes it can really work and be wrong, and I should sort of point out, by the way, don't put that in your Cambridge exam, but if you're writing a story, or you're writing an article outside of, or if you're talking to native people in a more social, go for it. There's nothing that sounds brilliant.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll have Irish greetings, in class. I expect my students to walk in and ask me what's the crack the first time I see them.
Exactly, and I don't think it's one or the other. I think there's going to be, if you're teaching general English or if you're teaching an exam class, there's going to be a weight on either a general focus or actually passing an exam technique. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, because I think it then brings in the argument of cultural awareness and authentic materials, and even things like L1. You have translation. There's so many other things that.
But I don't think you have to cross any of these things out.
No.
For any of the others, it's just a question of how you, as a professional, balance them in your classroom and over your curriculum that you impart to your students.
Mm-hmm. I think the textbooks generally do a decent job of getting sort of broader things in. I actually quite like how it's not exam prep, but it is just conversation. How the face-to-face textbooks bring in like little quirky things in spoken English that you would only get in, say, the UK and Ireland. Which some of my B2s last year found strange. But it's like, but yeah, that's how you do it. It's like apologizing to get anywhere in life,
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry, could I ask you to do this? And all the students are like, why are you saying sorry there? It's like that's just the culture. That's just the way it is.
But that's also a fun element of a fun part of the class as well is watching them discover these cultural differences, and the way that and trying to get across the idea that language is not simply a bunch of words. It's actually a bunch of meanings.
I think it's quite fun to bring in the whole world Englishes idea as well. Because, well, the world is sort of moving away from received pronunciation, which is nice because I certainly don't speak it.
Well, finally.
And I think it's necessary, especially like my friend in Italy. She has, she has a pretty good class on differences between American and British English. And then obviously I throw in like colloquialisms for the crack. I think it's just fun sort of world knowledge you bring in as well. It's nothing to do with the exams, but it's proper. It's teaching. It's proper English. We're all on planet Earth. Really.
Yeah, but this doesn't need to get in the way of the exam stuff. It's just part of the curriculum, I think.
Yeah, I think especially if they're in, say, for example, an advanced proficiency or first class, you set aside times to do one, and you set aside time to do the other.
Precisely.
It's kind of the fun of mixing it up. Sometimes you do. Well, everybody uses TED Talks in their classes because they're quite good for getting stuff in. We've talked about literature and poetry before as well. There's a wide range of sort of life things. I I think was it our very first podcast or second podcast. You talked about the strangers at a traffic light. That's always quite a good life sort of lesson.
Absolutely.
Perspective.
So, thank you, Tim, and also Mark. Well, thank you, Tim, for giving us so much to talk about today.
Yeah, so thanks, guys, for the comments. It's quite nice to see. It's not only that teachers are listening to our podcast as well. We're quite surprised and quite impressed by that. But the questions and responses we got this week have provided quite healthy discussion
and a nice podcast plan, especially Tim. Thank you for listening to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. If you'd like to get in touch, you can tweet us
at PhrasaliV on Twitter.
You can email us
phrasallyverbocious@gmail.com.
You can check out our show notes online at
phrasallyverbociouspodcast.blogspot.com.
And please like, review and comment us on your podcast subscription service of choice. Goodbye.
Goodbye.